Welcome to Dialogue. The U.S. Department of Justice has released millions of pages of documents related to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation following years of public pressure and a new federal transparency law. The files raise fresh questions not only about Epstein himself, but about how power, influence, and accountability operate when crimes involve elite networks and institutional failures. So what have these disclosures really revealed? What did it take so long for the information to come out? And after all these years, what consequences, if any, should follow? Join us for our live discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Gene Rossi, former federal prosecutor, and Josef Gregory Mahoney, professor of politics from East China Normal University. And later on, we have Radhika Desai, director of Geopolitical Economy Research Group. Well, welcome to the show. I will start with Mr. Rossi. So, I mean, a lot of people have been reading, still reading, I guess, because new material are coming out. Through news coverage on social media or traditional media. So I wonder, what's your take after reading through those emails, stories?
What I gather from the latest batch of documents that have been sent to the public is that the state prosecution was an incredibly good plea deal for Mr. Epstein. At the same time, the state was investigating Mr. Epstein. This is in 2007. The United States Attorney's Office in Miami had already drafted a 50-page indictment with 60 counts alleging conspirators besides Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. They have redacted that document and whited out and redacted the other conspirators in the draft federal indictment. That's point one. Point two, I'm going to give the U.S. Department of Justice a little bit of slack here. The amount of documents that they're reviewing is twice as high as the Eiffel Tower in Paris. That's a lot of documents. Millions of documents. It takes time, so that they're taking, deliberate process to go through all these documents. It doesn't shock me. What does shock me is they are whiting out, redacting names of persons who are being investigated or had been investigated, all men, and they inadvertently released names of victims. And they weren't supposed to. So it's sort of the gang that can't shoot straight. Some people say it's a clown show. So the Department of Justice has made mistakes in their disclosure. And the third point I want to make is this. They are redacting, whiting out information that they should not be whiting out and redacting. That troubles me greatly, because when Congress passed its bill back in late 2025, they wanted full and fair disclosure, and you had exceptions for ongoing investigations or national security. These changes, these redactions, these whiteouts are not under any of those exceptions. That troubles me a lot.
Okay, lack of transparency to a certain degree. And Professor Mahoney, beyond legal, the law and the practice by DOJ, as an individual, many people express shock, and they would say they are alarmed with the details which are horrific and criminal. Do you have a similar experience?
Well, I work in political science, and I've been looking at and studying the Trump administration since his first term. So I don't think that shock is something and I also, worked in the government when Clinton was president. So maybe I'm a little bit cynical, but I think, in fact, many people the world over were already pretty cynical about how Western elites conduct themselves politically, economically, morally, and so on. So it's not really surprising. But I will say, from a personal perspective, that this release has reminded me of two things. The first is, as a young boy, growing up in Alabama, I read a pocket biography of the American Revolutionary War hero, John Paul Jones, and it left an impression on me. And later, in the mid-90s, when I was working for the U.S. government during the Clinton administration, I read a Pulitzer Prize-winning biography on Jones, which illustrated the tremendous struggles he faced as one of the few and perhaps only competent naval captains in the U.S. Navy, or what was the precursor to the U.S. Navy, given the tremendous corruption of the American Continental Congress. And I was horrified to learn that this terrible corruption that I was witnessing then in my own work in Washington was nothing new, but had always been part of the system, even when the system was in its absolute infancy. The second is, as an academic who was bought out and blacklisted in the U.S. and settled into political exile in China, I was not surprised to find people like left-wing hero Noam Chomsky not only rubbing shoulders with people like Epstein or right-wing hero Bannon, but representing values completely at odds with those generally ascribed to him, suggesting the American left and right are complicit adversaries in public while colluding with each other privately, insomuch as both are elites benefiting from the same system. Now, this, I believe, exposes what many perceive to be the hypocrisy of the American system, which more often than not provides a dramatic performance of democracy, but is in fact a system of elite manipulation of the masses.
So it's not about the Democrats or the Republicans, or the left or the right. It's really about, some people would say it's evil and good versus good.
I would be sympathetic to such an interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Radhika, people would say, this is really about, if you look at the email, it's really about exploitation or sex abuse of underage girls, all young ladies there. Many people are concerned about the protection of children, the protection of women. And your take there?
Absolutely. So first of all, let me say that it has long been a symbol of power that you can be sexually uninhibited, sexually permitted to do whatever you like, even though it transgresses norms, it transgresses laws, etc. And so that's what we are seeing in this elite. But I would say that while, of course, all the young women who have been, and for that matter, I believe somebody mentioned that there were boys as well. But anyway, all the young people who have been sexually exploited in this way deserve justice. They are not getting it. So the federal prosecutor we were talking to just now mentioned that the redactions are a little bit haphazard. But what we do see is that the redactions have often leaving in the names and identities of the victims. So they're not serving the victims very well at all. And I think this is a matter of major concern. But at the same time, we should put this victimization and the demand for justice for the victims in the wider context that Joseph was just mentioning, which is the context of a corrupt elite. I mean, as a republic that was created in order to be a white republic against the indigenous population of the Americas, against the slaves, and so on. It was always an elite affair, even though over time it got democratized in the sense of giving every adult a vote. But over the past 4 or 5 decades under neoliberalism, inequality has become even greater. And therefore, the elites who are buying the democracy in the best democracy money can buy are even richer today, and their corruption is that much worse, that much bigger, and that much... and I think its effects on state policy. We already have instances of these people who are probably in this circle manipulating laws relating to the economy, finance, but there's also connections being discovered to Israel. For all the harping about Russiagate, what we are seeing is a network of influence that Israel has penetrated.
Well, that's what's really happening right now, I guess. So, Mr. Rossi, as you are a former prosecutor. Of course, it was released, 300 million pages were released in line with this law, transparency law, passed by the Congress. But still, it's only half of these all documents. What about the other half? If they are held, and does that meet the requirement of being transparent?
I would say no. I mentioned that the documents stack up to 2 Eiffel Towers. So they've gotten rid of 1 Eiffel Tower. They got one to go. But I do have to say this. The professor brought up history. The Department of Justice was established in 1870 under President Grant. And I'm not a professor of history, but I do know this. This is the most political attorney general and deputy attorney general we have ever had. And I'm even including John Mitchell under Nixon. These are two former criminal defense attorneys of President Trump. And there is no wall. There's almost a symbiotic relationship between the politics of the White House and the machinations of the Department of Justice. So to get the transparency, the American public wants transparency, but given that the two defense attorneys who run the department and are hand in glove with the president, they don't have any confidence that the other Eiffel Tower is going to be any more transparent or less transparent than the first Eiffel Tower that was produced. Here's the thing that bothers me greatly. It appears that they are trying to protect Donald Trump, whose name is littered in both Eiffel Towers. I can guarantee that. And they are desperately trying to mitigate or make less severe his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein, who in the 1990s was probably Donald Trump's best friend. And Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, I think 2 days ago said, there's nothing wrong with having partied with Jeffrey Epstein. Well, that scares the living heck out of me that second Eiffel Tower probably has more information that connects the two.
Okay, that's a good point, Mr. Rossi there. But the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, claimed, the partial release fulfills the law, seeming to close the book on the whole case. That's it. Do you agree? Do American people agree? That's the end of the story?
Right now. I got to address that right now. He is absolutely categorically wrong when he said that his first Eiffel Tower production of documents complies with the law. It does not. One, he divulged victims' names. Two, they whited out and redacted information that should have been disclosed. Three, they should have provided to the public that draft indictment, which lists the other conspirators, which are probably men. And they were protecting the men who were involved in this horrendous sex trafficking operation that was going on for decades.
Exactly, for decades. I mean, sex trafficking involving young ladies and underage girls. Professor Mahoney, of course, President Trump, during a press conference, he said that, there's nothing about me. So it's time to move on from Epstein files. Let's get on something else. Do you agree?
No, let me follow up on some of the points that Gene was making. It's not just that the DOJ, the Department of Justice, has been so heavily politicized. The FBI has also been heavily politicized. Even the National Archives, with Marco Rubio heading the National Records, has been heavily politicized. And of course, Congress has not lived up to its constitutional mandate of curtailing executive excesses. And because, as has been stated, because the president has been repeatedly implicated in possibly inappropriate relations, up to being compromised by a foreign government, not just with Epstein, but via a foreign government. I don't think we can ever trust this government to give us a fair and honest accounting. And in fact, I think this is the ultimate conclusion that many have already reached. And it doesn't matter if we even get the next Eiffel Tower, there will still be this deep suspicion that a lot of material has been hidden or not fully accounted for. That said, I think the fact of the matter is that Trump, during the campaign, he created the expectation that a list existed, and perhaps one did or does, maybe the indictment, or something else. But what we find in the current mess are a lot of vague associations, a lot of redactions, even some rather sordid contexts that point to questionable, if not illegal behaviors, but not much that a well-paid lawyer couldn't easily outflank should someone raise these issues in court. That said, again, I don't think that even if we had all the materials that people have any confidence in the system now, and it has already fallen victim to tremendous conspiracy theories, which will always be impossible to prove, but also always provide people, I think, with wiggle room to claim that they have nothing to hide.
If you go back a little bit, Professor Mahoney, of course, it's under President Trump. Let's give him the credit, which his government released the file partially, but it's better than, say, before that, the 4 years of the Democratic government and Joe Biden. Why did they hold the documents?
It's a good question, and maybe we'll have some answers provided when the Clintons come to testify. Maybe we will see that there are indeed a lot of people on both sides of the political aisle that are going to be fundamentally compromised. I don't understand why we didn't see the Biden administration taking a more active stance. I think that there was a broad expectation that we would see a more effective prosecution of Donald Trump for a number of the crimes that were associated with his first term in office. And those didn't happen for whatever reason. And now they've been buried through executive privilege and the fact that he controls much of the federal government and the capacity to prosecute. So I don't know why. I don't know why the Biden administration didn't divulge unless they were themselves likely to be implicated.
Yeah, Mr. Rossi, go ahead.
Yeah, I can answer that. Under the Biden administration, one, you didn't have a campaign promise. And two, under the Biden administration, you didn't have Congress passing a law saying you had to disclose it. So if you don't have that, the DOJ policy and custom and practice, because I was a federal prosecutor for almost 30 years, the practice is once you close an investigation, you're not going to release that to the public. And so that's the custom and practice of the Department of Justice in any investigation, regardless of how small it is. Here, we have a congressional statute act that says you have to disclose it with certain exceptions. So that's the big difference as to why the Biden administration did not disclose what's been disclosed now, the first Eiffel Tower.
A good explanation there. Yes, indeed, there are differences there. Radhika, but at the end of the day, people are asking for, say, accountability and justice. If you look at some of the email, we can't prove it's absolutely true, but it raises serious questions. And you want to have an investigation, you want to see the results. For example, there are, it appeared to be Epstein and his girlfriend Maxwell. They appeared to have buried two foreign girls who were strangled to death during rough fetish sex. And people would ask, what are their names? How were they killed and who killed them? And those responsible, in general, in the normal situation, there will be an investigation, there will be answers. But do you think there will be answers in this case?
I think that in this case, this case has been a political football. This case has been a political football all the way through, and it will remain that, so that it will be used politically by the two parties against one another to the extent possible. I think that Biden did not disclose or release documents earlier because basically a lot of people connected with the upper reaches of the Democratic Party are being implicated, would have been implicated. We don't know what's behind those raid actions and so on. The very fact that Trump had to make the campaign promise to release these files shows you how much support there is to release that files, because Trump is willing to promise anything in order to get elected, and this is one of those promises. So that's what he did, and so we are now in this kind of very complex situation. But I suspect that justice for the victims, those who are dead, those who have been abused, those who have committed suicide, I think that's going to be a long way away, if at all they will get anything, because this involves extremely rich and powerful people, the very top of American society. And I just don't think, unless there is a massive, fundamental change in the political forces that rule the United States, that you will see justice.
Mr. Rossi?
Well, I just want to say this. I follow up to that comment. If the elections this November change the dynamics of the House and Senate, so the Democrats control the House and possibly the Senate. You were going to see multiple oversight hearings about why the government hasn't acted. You brought up a good point. If there's an allegation that one or two victims of this horrendous sex trafficking scheme had to be buried because they died during the crime, there's no statute of limitations on sex trafficking that results in murder. So they could open up an investigation under the federal laws and even the state laws if there was a death resulting from the sex trafficking. There would be no statute of limitations to present that prosecution.
Yeah, Mr. Rossi, well said. Most people, when they read part of the documents, because it's too long, too many of them, they would say there are a lot of doubts. At a certain point, you want to know more about that, and they think that guarantees some investigation from the judicial department to continue to invest, to provide answer to the public. But the DOJ obviously said that, they would stop the investigation, and that's the end of the story. Do you think there's any investigation going on or could continue under the Trump administration now?
No chance. No chance. Once they distribute and disclose that second Eiffel Tower of documents, they're going to wash their hands of it and say, Congress, we complied with the law, now shut up. That's all the transparency you're going to get. If Congress is not satisfied, they may go into federal court and make a motion or move to hold the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, in contempt because she hasn't faithfully complied with the law. But in terms of this current administration, this Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who's hand in glove with the president, once they disclose the second batch of documents, they're going to say, that's it, we've complied with the law, we're not doing anything else.
Professor Mahoney, the U.S. government, as we all know, they tend to preach to other governments, the rest of the world, how important it is for the rule of law to overwhelm in any governments. What about the rule of law?
Well, that's a big question because it's not just the rule of law that we have domestically now that's being challenged by excessive ICE policies, but also the fact that the U.S. president has said that he's above international law. I think that this is why we're seeing this tremendous turn, not only in countries like Canada, but in Europe, where people are saying, wait a minute, we were riding with this guy for better or worse under the rubric of shared values, but maybe there were no shared values after all, or maybe we can no longer stand to be associated so directly, so transparently with such moral degradation. So I think that there is a tremendous sense of distrust in the legal and political system right now in the United States. I think we will look back on this episode as another key turning point in the loss of faith in the system, not only by the American people, but by the rest of the people around the world.
So are you saying that justice will not be done, basically?
I don't think it will be done. I think that you'll see some elements of justice. We've seen Maxwell prosecuted. We saw Epstein and Brunel commit suicide. We may see someone like Steve Tisch, who's the co-owner of the NFL team, the New York Giants, being investigated by the NFL. That's been suggested by the NFL commissioner that will happen, and he may get the former Prince Andrew treatment and be diminished or forced to sell his stake, or it may open the door to other forms of consequences. But I don't think we can expect to see sort of the wholesale accountability or justice that I think that the victims and indeed the public deserve.
Well, Radhika, what would you say about the political impact on the U.S. Politics, the system, the elections, for example?
Well, I think this is going to, I mean, look, this represents another, Joe talked about decline of political trust, but the other side of that process is the decline in the quality of leadership in practically every Western country. The impact of this is not just confined to the United States. In Britain, what we are seeing is a situation in which this present government may well fall because of the implication of Peter Mandelson, who has been one of the most influential people within the Labour Party and who was appointed as the British ambassador to the United States, even though it was known that he was deeply involved with the Epstein circle and so on and so forth. So the political impact is going to be huge. And I think that this, as I say, represents a system in crisis which can only produce a very venal kind of political leadership. I mean, what has to go wrong in any society before people like Trump or Boris Johnson or whatever can be elected to power? And I think this is what we are looking at. And I think that the political impact is, well, it's huge, but you have to remember that it is part of a long-term process of decline.
Well, to add to that, Radhika, if I may, you talk about the venality of the system. I think if we go back to an earlier point that you raised, and that was the extent to which this was an operation that maybe was being directed by a foreign government. I think one of the questions that we have to ask is, did the sexual exploitation of children on Epstein's island, was this part of the same system that killed scores of children in places like Gaza? Did the former help facilitate the latter? And if so, that's a level of depravity that we need to come to terms with.
A very fine point. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Rossi, as Radhika mentioned, some of the European elites got involved in this case. They either stepped back or stepped down from their position or apologized or, Prince Andrew, etc. But we haven't seen something like that in the U.S. In the U.S., elites involved in the Epstein case. Do you see any difference between the reaction from the two sides?
I do see a difference, and it's called hypocrisy. A lot of the individuals who are mentioned in this Eiffel Tower production, Bill Gates, other billionaires, shame on them that they affiliated with Jeffrey Epstein, whose reputation, I want to focus on this. Everybody knew his reputation for many, many years, that he had this island and something in New Mexico. They knew that something strange was happening with Jeffrey Epstein, yet they still affiliated with him. I do want to go to the rule of law, and that goes to hypocrisy. We just arrested Venezuela President Maduro, brought him to the United States for a trial. One of the reasons we did that, and this gets to hypocrisy, is that Maduro was messing around with the elections, the voting. Donald Trump in the last week, on several occasions, has said that I may nationalize the voting process in November of this year. He, by fiat, without any justification, in violation of the United States Constitution, he's going to take over the voting booths. So he rearrested Maduro for doing the same thing that he's now ruminating about. That's called hypocrisy, and it puts a stake in the heart of the rule of law.
Well, hypocrisy and, of course, the protection of the elites or protection of themselves and the lack of justice. That's a concern, I guess, for a lot of people. We will see what will happen as time goes on. With that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.